Chapter 1. Ghost of the Past. Michael Wilson sat in the dimly lit solitude of his penthouse on the 40th floor, surrounded by a silence that felt both comforting and oppressive. Outside, the noise of the big city seeped through the thick windows, roaring cars, the hum of voices, the ringing of phones. But inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. The penthouse was his refuge, a place where he could hide from the world he despised. Here, he remained alone with his thoughts and memories. Everything had changed 11 years ago. And since then, Michael had lived as if in the shadows, cursing his past and the people who had betrayed him. He had achieved everything, wealth, influence, status, but it no longer brought him joy. All that remained was emptiness. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ringing of the phone. It was unexpected. No one ever called him unannounced. His secretary always filtered calls, leaving only the important messages. But this time, the phone rang persistently as if someone on the other end was not going to give up. Michael slowly picked up the receiver. "Wilson," he said curtly. "Michael, it's Susan," came the anxious voice of his secretary. "I'm sorry to bother you, but a woman named June Parsons from Social Services urgently needs to see you. She insisted on a face-to-face meeting and said it was a matter of life and death." Michael frowned. Social Services? What could they possibly want from him? "What does she want?" he asked, skepticism lacing his voice. "She said she can't discuss it over the phone. It's about a letter found next to a woman who tried to take her own life." Michael felt a cold chill run down his spine. A letter? Along with that chill came a vague sense of foreboding that this was more than just a formality. "Send her in," he said shortly and hung up. Only a few minutes passed, but they dragged on endlessly. His thoughts raced in every direction. When the knock on the door finally came, it startled him, as if he had been pulled from a deep sleep. Michael got up and opened the door. A middle-aged woman stood there, dressed in a plain gray suit, but her eyes stood out. They were filled with worry and exhaustion, as if she carried the burdens of others on her shoulders. "Michael Wilson?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Yes, that's me. Come in." June Parsons entered the penthouse, looking around as if surveying a crime scene. Her movements were restrained, but she quickly got to the point once inside. "Mr. Wilson," she began, pulling a letter from her bag. "A few days ago, a woman was found in an apartment on the other side of town. She had attempted suicide and was discovered in critical condition. This letter was found next to her, addressed to you. It's signed by your ex-wife, Sally." Michael froze, his heart skipping a beat. Slowly he took the envelope, feeling his hands tremble as he held the paper. Inside was a letter he had been too afraid to see, but it had already brought with it the ghosts of the past. "Who is this woman?" he asked quietly, feeling an invisible noose tighten around him. June sighed, looking him straight in the eye. "Her name is Emily Harrison. She's a mother of 2 children, and she mentioned your name as the last word she said before losing consciousness." Michael felt a buzzing in his head. His past was rushing back with the force of a hurricane he had tried so hard to avoid for all these years. The answers to questions he feared to ask himself were now standing before him. He didn't know what awaited him, but he understood that there was no avoiding it. There was only one thing left to do: open the letter and face the ghosts head on. Chapter 2. The Trap. The next morning, Michael woke up earlier than usual. His sleep had been restless, filled with fragmented memories and images he wanted to forget. But one thing was clear: he could no longer ignore Sally's letter and what it meant. The ghosts of the past had resurfaced, and he had no choice but to confront them. After getting dressed, Michael decided that he needed to speak with June Parsons again and learn more about the children mentioned in the letter. He had to understand what connected them to this inheritance and, most importantly, how to protect them. The meeting was arranged at the Social Services office. When Michael arrived, June was waiting for him with a concerned expression. He could tell that she, like him, was unsure how to proceed. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Wilson," June said as she led him to a small conference room. She closed the door behind them, her demeanor serious. "Please, just call me Michael," he replied, taking a seat. June nodded and sat across from him, placing a folder on the table between them. "I've done some digging since we last spoke," she began, "and I found something disturbing. Emily Harrison, the woman who tried to take her life, wasn't just some stranger. She was trying to protect those children from something, or rather, someone." Michael's brow furrowed. "From whom?" "We don't know exactly," June said, her voice lowering. "But it appears that these people are connected to your former company. I noticed some names in the records that are linked to past deals with Jordan and Sons. It seems this goes deeper than just Sally." A cold knot formed in Michael's stomach. Tony and Robert Jordan, he had long known them as the embodiment of betrayal and destruction. But what were they doing now, and why was their influence still felt after all these years? "You're saying it's not just about Sally?" Michael asked, his voice steady but tense. "They want these children. But why?" June sighed and pushed the folder toward him. "It's more than just the children. It's about the inheritance, the control. There's a document in Sally's possession that they need to secure that inheritance. They think these children are the key to it." Michael opened the folder and found a series of documents, including a legal contract and what appeared to be a will. The papers were old, but the names on them were unmistakable. His eyes locked on a particular document, Henry Jordan's last will and testament. The will contained an unusual clause. The inheritance was to pass to the children of Sally, provided they reached a certain age under her guardianship. If she were no longer their legal guardian, the rights would revert to another party. Michael realized with a sinking feeling that Tony and Robert had been trying to eliminate Sally to gain control of the inheritance. "This isn't just about money," Michael muttered. "It's a trap. They've been trying to take her out of the picture to get to the children, and now they're after them directly." June's eyes widened in understanding. "They want to control the legacy left by Henry Jordan, but they need to remove any obstacles first, including you if necessary." Michael clenched his fists. He knew now that protecting these children meant more than just keeping them safe. It meant dismantling the entire scheme that Tony and Robert had built. But he also knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. "I have to find those kids," Michael said, his voice filled with determination. "And I have to stop them before it's too late." June looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope. "Michael, this is dangerous. You're walking into something much bigger than you realize." "I know," he replied, standing up. "But I can't let them win. Not this time." As he left the office, Michael's mind raced with the possibilities. He had spent years running from his past, but now it was time to confront it head on. He was ready to take down Tony and Robert no matter the cost. But as he walked out into the city streets, he felt a shiver of anticipation. This was no longer just about revenge or justice. It was a game of survival, and he was willing to risk everything to protect the innocent lives caught in the crossfire. Suddenly his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw an unknown number flashing on the screen. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Michael Wilson," he said. A cold, menacing voice responded. "You're playing with fire, Michael. Stay away from those kids if you want to stay alive." Michael's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles turning white. The enemy was closer than he had thought, and they were watching his every move. The stakes had never been higher, but he knew there was no turning back now. He was ready for the fight of his life. Chapter 3. Close Enemies. Michael Wilson returned home with a growing sense of dread. The conversation with June had left him with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Time was running out. The stakes were higher than he could have imagined, and if Tony and Robert were truly after something connected to these children, he needed to act fast. But first, he needed more information. Information only one person could provide. He knew what he had to do, even though the thought of it made his skin crawl. He had to confront Robert Jordan, the man who had betrayed him more than a decade ago. Robert might be his enemy, but he was also the only one who could shed light on what was happening. Michael hesitated for only a moment before finding Robert's number, which he hadn't deleted despite everything. His finger hovered over the screen and then he pressed call. The phone rang longer than expected before Robert finally picked up. His voice was cool, but there was a hint of surprise. Michael, this is unexpected. What made you think we should talk? Michael gritted his teeth, keeping his voice steady. We need to meet, Robert, face to face. There are things we can't discuss over the phone. Robert paused, clearly weighing his options. You're not calling to reconcile, are you? This isn't about the past, Michael replied coldly. It's about the future, and if you want to stay alive, you'll listen to me. Another pause, this one longer. Michael could almost hear the gears turning in Robert's mind. Fine, Robert finally said. I'll hear you out. Where and when? They arranged to meet at an old bar on the outskirts of the city, a place they used to frequent back when they were friends. The location was neutral enough to avoid suspicion, but Michael knew that going there was risky. He didn't expect a warm welcome, but he had to do what was necessary. When Michael entered the bar, his eyes quickly found Robert sitting in a corner booth. He looked much the same as he had years ago, but there was something different. An edge, a weariness that hadn't been there before. Robert gave a brief nod, motioning for Michael to join him. It's been a long time, Robert said, a forced smile tugging at his lips as he pushed an empty glass aside. Let's skip the pleasantries, Robert, Michael replied, taking a seat across from him. You and I both know this isn't a friendly reunion. You want something and I want to know what it is. Robert's smile faded, replaced by a wary look. What makes you think I'm after anything? Don't play dumb, Robert, Michael shot back. I know about your interest in Sally's children. I know they're connected to whatever it is you and Tony are trying to get your hands on. Robert tensed, and for a moment Michael saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual guarded expression. And what makes you think I'd tell you anything? Robert's voice was measured, but there was a hint of something darker beneath the surface. Because if you don't, things will only get worse for you, Michael said, leaning forward. You think I've forgotten what you did to me? To Sally? You think I'll let you ruin more lives? Robert didn't respond immediately. He looked down at the table as if considering his next move. Finally, he sighed. You're right, Michael. This isn't just about the children. It's about what they might inherit. Sally hid something from us, something important. We've been searching for a document, something that was supposed to be in your possession, but it wasn't. Tony believes the children are the key. Michael clenched his fists under the table, the anger bubbling inside him. So this was it. Tony and Robert wanted to destroy him and the lives of innocent children for something that might not even exist. You'll never get what you're after, Michael said through gritted teeth as he stood up. Those kids will be safe, and I'll make sure neither of you gets anywhere near them. Robert watched him with a mix of weariness and resignation. And what are you going to do, Michael? You think you can stop us? I don't think, Michael replied, his voice hard as steel. I know. With that, he turned and began to walk away, but before he could reach the door, Robert called after him. Michael, be careful. Tony isn't the man you used to know. He'll do whatever it takes to win. Michael paused, considering Robert's words, but he didn't turn back. He knew what lay ahead, danger, betrayal, and a fight for survival. But he had a goal now, and he wouldn't stop until he saw it through. He left the bar and stepped out into the cold night, determined to protect what mattered most. The enemy was close, but this time Michael wouldn't let them win. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Past. Michael returned home with a sense of impending doom hanging over him. The conversation with Robert had confirmed his worst fears. Tony and Robert were not just playing a power game. They were after something that could change everything. The stakes had never been higher, and Michael knew he needed to act quickly before they made their next move. but the weight of the situation was overwhelming. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. There was only one person left who might be able to help him piece together the puzzle. Mark Hastings, an old friend and former colleague who had stayed loyal even after the company collapsed. Mark knew the ins and outs of Jordan and Sons better than anyone and might have insights into what Tony and Robert were planning. Michael didn't waste any time. He called Mark and arranged for him to come to the penthouse immediately. Mark didn't ask many questions. He could sense the urgency in Michael's voice and knew something serious was going on. When Mark arrived, his face was lined with concern. He was a few years younger than Michael, but life had taken its toll on him as well. They sat down in the living room, and Michael wasted no time getting to the point. "I need to know what happened after I left the company," Michael said, his voice tense, "especially what Tony and Robert have been up to." Mark looked at Michael for a long moment, as if trying to decide how much to say. Finally, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. "After you left, everything went to hell," Mark began. "Tony and Robert started selling off assets, laundering money, making deals with all the wrong people. They pulled in some pretty shady characters, people with connections to organized crime, but it wasn't just about the money. There were rumors, things that went far beyond business, blackmail, threats, even disappearances." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. He had always known Tony and Robert were ruthless, but this was on another level. They were willing to destroy everything in their path, including him, to get what they wanted. "Who are these people?" Michael asked, his voice low and controlled. "Who did they bring in?" Mark shook his head. "It's hard to say for sure. They never let anyone see the full picture. But names kept popping up, people with ties to the old London underworld. Connections that their father, Henry, must have had, but we never knew about. This isn't just business, Michael. It's something much darker." Michael's mind raced. Everything was starting to make sense. The threats, the pursuit of Sally's children, the strange behavior of those around him. Tony and Robert weren't just after control of the company. They were playing a game that involved far more than he had ever imagined. "There's something else," Mark said, hesitating. "I've heard whispers that Tony and Robert are after something specific, a document, a contract, something they believe will give them ultimate control. They think it's tied to the inheritance left by their father." Michael's heart pounded. He remembered the clause in Henry Jordan's will, the one that placed the inheritance in the hands of Sally's children under certain conditions. If Tony and Robert believed those children were the key, they would stop at nothing to get to them. "You think these kids are connected to that?" Michael asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Mark nodded. "If they're connected to you, then yes. Tony and Robert think they're the last piece of the puzzle." Michael closed his eyes, trying to process the information. The stakes had just gotten even higher. Tony and Robert weren't just looking to take over the company. They were looking to erase any trace of resistance, any obstacle in their way, and that included him and the children. "I have to find them first," Michael said, his voice filled with resolve, "and I have to protect them, whatever it takes." Mark looked at him with concern. "I'll help you, but Michael, be careful. These people won't stop until they get what they want." Michael stood up, a determined look on his face. He knew the risks, but he also knew that he couldn't let Tony and Robert win, not this time. As Mark left, Michael's phone buzzed with a new message. He pulled it out and felt a surge of adrenaline as he read the words. "You're in over your head, Michael. Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." Michael gripped the phone tightly, feeling the weight of the threat. The enemy was watching, and they were ready to strike at any moment, but he also knew that he couldn't back down now. Too much was at stake. He was ready to face whatever came next, no matter the cost. Chapter 5. The Fatal Betrayal. Michael Wilson stood at the threshold of his penthouse, watching as Mark Hastings disappeared into the elevator. Their conversation had left Michael with a gnawing sense of urgency. If Tony and Robert were truly after something tied to Sally's children, he had to act quickly. But there was one more thing he had to do, something that filled him with dread, even as he knew it was necessary. He needed to confront Robert Jordan directly, to force him into revealing what he and Tony were really after. It was a risky move. Robert was as slippery as they came, and trusting him was out of the question. But Michael had no choice. He dialed Robert's number, feeling a familiar knot of tension tighten in his chest. The phone rang longer than expected, and Michael was on the verge of hanging up when Robert's voice finally came through. "Michael, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Robert's voice was laced with sarcasm, but there was a note of wariness, too. "We need to talk, Robert," Michael said, keeping his tone level. "In person. There are things you're involved in that I need to understand." There was a brief pause on the other end, and Michael could almost hear Robert weighing his options. "Is this about the past, Michael, or something more immediate?" Robert's tone was guarded now. "This isn't about the past," Michael replied. "It's about the future. And if you want to have one, you'll meet me." Another pause. Then, with a sigh, Robert agreed. "Fine. Name the time and place." They arranged to meet at a quiet, out-of-the-way bar on the outskirts of the city, a place where they used to meet before everything fell apart. Michael knew it was a calculated risk, but he also knew that this might be his only chance to get the information he needed. When Michael arrived at the bar, he found Robert already there, sitting in a dimly lit corner with a glass of whiskey in front of him. Robert looked older, more worn out than Michael remembered, but his eyes still held that same calculating gleam. "Michael," Robert greeted him with a thin smile as Michael took a seat across from him. "I have to say, I'm surprised. I didn't think you'd ever want to see me again." "Let's skip the small talk, Robert," Michael said, his voice cold. "We both know this isn't a friendly reunion. You and Tony are up to something, and I want to know what it is." Robert's smile faded, and his expression turned serious. "You're still as blunt as ever, Michael, but I'm not sure what you think I can tell you." "Don't play games with me," Michael snapped. "I know you're after something related to Sally's children. What is it, Robert? What are you and Tony trying to accomplish?" Robert's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Michael thought he saw a flicker of fear in them. But then Robert leaned back in his chair, as if trying to appear nonchalant. "Tony and I are looking for something that should have been ours from the start," Robert said finally. "Something Sally kept from us, a document, a key to controlling what's left of our father's legacy." Michael's heart pounded as he listened. The inheritance. It all made sense now. Tony and Robert believed the children were somehow connected to the document that would give them control over the fortune Henry Jordan had left behind. "Those kids have nothing to do with this," Michael said, his voice low and dangerous. "But you and Tony are willing to destroy lives to get what you want." Robert's gaze hardened. "You're wrong, Michael. They're the only thing standing between us and what's rightfully ours. If we have to go through them, so be it." Michael felt a surge of anger, but he kept his composure. "You're not going to get what you're after, Robert. I'll make sure of that." Robert's lips curled into a sneer. "And how exactly do you plan to stop us, Michael? You're one man, and we've got resources you can't even imagine." Michael stood up, his eyes locked on Robert's. "Watch me." He turned and walked out of the bar, his mind racing with what he had just learned. Tony and Robert were more desperate than he had realized, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But Michael was determined to protect those children, no matter what it took. As he reached his car, Michael's phone buzzed with a new message. He unlocked it and read the words that sent a chill down his spine. "If you get in our way, you'll end up just like her." Michael's blood ran cold. He knew exactly who "her" referred to. Sally. The message was a warning and a promise. He looked around, his eyes scanning the darkness, but he saw no one. Whoever was watching him was well hidden, and that made them even more dangerous. Michael knew he was in deeper than ever before, but there was no turning back now. He got into his car and started the engine, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The fight was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. But Michael had something Tony and Robert didn't. He had nothing left to lose, and that made him the most dangerous player in the game. Chapter 6. Redemption. Michael didn't waste a second after receiving the threatening message. The warning was clear, but it only steeled his resolve. The stakes had never been higher, and the time for hesitation was long past. He knew now that he had to protect those children at all costs, but he also had to ensure that Tony and Robert never got their hands on what they were after. The plan that had been forming in his mind over the past few days was risky, possibly suicidal, but it was the only way he could see to end this once and for all. He had to lure Tony and Robert into a trap, force them to reveal their true intentions, and make them pay for everything they had done. The next morning, Michael contacted June Parsons. He knew he needed her help to execute his plan, and he trusted her, even though he knew this would put her in grave danger. He explained the situation to her, laying out every detail of what he had learned. June listened carefully, her expression growing more serious with every word. When Michael finished, she took a deep breath. "This is incredibly dangerous, Michael," she said, her voice filled with concern. "But I can see that you've made up your mind. What do you need me to do?" "I need you to help me get the children out of here," Michael said. "I'm going to set up a meeting with Tony and Robert, make them think they're getting what they want. But I need you to take the kids somewhere safe, somewhere only you and I know about." June nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'll do it, but Michael, be careful. These men are dangerous, and they won't hesitate to kill you if they feel cornered." "I know," Michael replied, his voice steady. "But this is the only way to end it." After finalizing the arrangements with June, Michael made the call to Tony. The meeting was set for later that evening at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place they had once used for clandestine business deals. It was isolated, the perfect place for a final confrontation. When the time came, Michael arrived early to prepare. He set up a hidden recording device to capture every word of the conversation. He knew that if he could get Tony and Robert to admit their crimes, he could finally bring them to justice. But if things went wrong, he also knew this could be his last stand. As he waited in the dark, empty warehouse, the minutes dragged by, each one heavier than the last. Finally, he heard the sound of a car approaching. Michael's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the headlights pierce the darkness and the car come to a stop just outside the building. Tony and Robert emerged from the vehicle, their faces tense and focused. They were accompanied by two men, likely hired muscle, who looked ready for trouble. Michael took a deep breath and stepped out of the shadows. "Tony, Robert," he called out, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "Michael," Tony responded, a smirk on his lips as he approached. "I'm surprised you had the guts to show up." "You wanted what Sally had," Michael said, ignoring the jab. "I'm here to make sure you never get it." Tony's smile faded, replaced by a cold, calculating expression. "Don't play games with us, Michael. We know what you're trying to do, and it won't work." "Really?" Michael shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're the ones who are desperate." Robert stepped forward, his eyes blazing with anger. "Where are the children, Michael? We know you've been hiding them. Tell us where they are, and maybe we'll let you walk out of here." Michael clenched his fists, his heart racing. "They're safe. That's all you need to know. But I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to end this." Tony's expression darkened. "End this? You really think you have the upper hand? You're alone, Michael. There's no one coming to save you." Michael knew this was the moment. He had to push them further, make them show their hand. "I may be alone, but I have something you don't. Proof of everything you've done. Your crimes, your ties to organized crime, the threats you made. It's all recorded, and if anything happens to me, it's going straight to the authorities." For a moment, Tony and Robert seemed to falter. But then, Tony's smirk returned, colder than before. "You think that scares us?" Tony sneered. "We've covered our tracks. No one will believe you." Michael's eyes narrowed. "You're wrong, Tony. I've got enough evidence to bury you both. And you know what? The police are already on their way." Tony's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of pure rage. "You're lying." "Try me," Michael said, holding his ground. Before anyone could react, the hired muscle stepped forward, drawing their weapons. Michael's heart raced, but he didn't flinch. He knew he had one last card to play. Suddenly, the sound of sirens filled the air, echoing through the warehouse. Tony and Robert froze, their eyes wide with shock. Michael had called their bluff, and now they were trapped. "You lose," Michael said quietly, watching as Tony and Robert realized their game was over. But just as the police cars screeched to a stop outside the warehouse, Tony snapped. With a roar of fury, he lunged at Michael, pulling out a gun. The next few seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as chaos erupted. Shots rang out, and Michael felt a searing pain in his side as he fell to the ground. The world blurred around him as the police stormed the building, shouting orders and taking down Tony, Robert, and their men. But all Michael could think about were the children, whether they were safe, whether his sacrifice had been enough. As darkness closed in, he heard a familiar voice calling his name. June. She had come, just as he had asked, and as he slipped into unconsciousness, he felt a strange sense of peace. He had done what he set out to do. He had protected the innocent, even at the cost of his own life. But as the blackness swallowed him, he couldn't help but wonder, was this truly the end? Or was there still one final twist left in the tale? Chapter 7. A Descent into Darkness. Michael awoke to the sterile scent of antiseptic and the soft beeping of medical machines. His vision was blurry, his body heavy, but the pain in his side was a sharp reminder that he was still alive. He blinked a few times, trying to piece together where he was. As his surroundings came into focus, he realized he was in a hospital room. Memories of the warehouse flooded back. Tony's fury, the gunshot, the chaos, as the police stormed in. He had done it. He had stopped them. But at what cost? The door to his room creaked open and June Parsons stepped in, her face etched with worry. Relief washed over her as she saw Michael awake. "You're alive," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank God." Michael tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in his side made him wince. June rushed to his side, gently pushing him back down. "Take it easy," she said softly. "You've been through a lot." "How long have I been here?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse. 3 days, June replied. "The doctors weren't sure if you'd pull through, but you're tougher than you look." Michael managed a weak smile. "What happened? Did they get Tony and Robert?" June nodded. "They're in custody, along with their hired thugs. The evidence you gathered was enough to put them away for a long time. It's over, Michael. You did it." Michael closed his eyes, letting the weight of her words sink in. It was over. The nightmare that had haunted him for years had finally come to an end. But there was something else, something that gnawed at him even as he lay in that hospital bed. "The children," he said, opening his eyes. "Are they safe?" June hesitated and Michael's heart skipped a beat. "They're safe," she said finally. "I made sure they were taken to a secure location just as you asked. But there's something you need to know." Michael's pulse quickened. "What is it?" June took a deep breath, her expression pained. "After everything that happened, I did some more digging into Sally's past. I found something you need to hear." Michael's mind raced. What could possibly be left to uncover? Sally was gone. Tony and Robert were behind bars and the children were safe. What more could there be? June handed him a small envelope, sealed with wax. "This was found in Sally's personal effects," she said. "It's addressed to you." With trembling hands, Michael took the envelope and carefully broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in Sally's familiar script. As he began to read, his heart sank. "Michael, if you're reading this, it means that I'm no longer with you. I've carried the burden of my secrets for too long, and I know now that I owe you the truth, even if it comes too late. You've always wondered why I left you, why I betrayed you. The truth is, I was forced to. Tony and Robert had something on me, something that I couldn't fight. They knew about the children, our children. Yes, Michael, Jake and Lily are yours. I never told you because I feared what would happen if you knew. I thought I could protect them by keeping them away from you, but I was wrong. They've been pawns in this game, just like we all have. I'm sorry, Michael. I'm sorry for everything. But now that you know the truth, I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. Protect our children, Michael. They're all that matters now. With all my love, Sally. The letter slipped from Michael's fingers as the weight of Sally's words crashed down on him. Jake and Lily, his children. All this time he had been fighting to protect them, not knowing they were his own flesh and blood. His mind reeled with the implications, the betrayal, the pain, the sacrifices. It all made sense now. Sally hadn't just left him. She had tried to protect him and their children from the darkness that Tony and Robert represented, but in the end her secrets had only brought more suffering. June watched him, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I'm sorry, Michael," she said quietly. "I thought you deserved to know." Michael felt a wave of emotions, anger, grief, guilt, all crashing over him at once. He had won the battle, but the victory felt hollow. The truth, once revealed, had shattered what little peace he had left. "I was so close," Michael whispered, his voice trembling. "I was so close to saving her, to saving them, but I failed." "You didn't fail," June said firmly. "You saved those children. You gave them a future. Sally would have wanted that." Michael nodded numbly, but the weight of the revelation pressed down on him like a leaden cloak. Everything he had done, everything he had fought for, it had all been for them, his children. But now that he knew the truth, he realized there was one final step he needed to take. "I need to see them," Michael said, his voice stronger now. "I need to see Jake and Lily." June smiled sadly. "Of course. I'll make the arrangements." As she left the room, Michael leaned back against the pillows, closing his eyes. The past had finally come full circle, and the truth, though painful, had given him clarity. There was still a chance for redemption, a chance to be the father he never knew he was. But as the door closed behind June, a single, chilling thought crept into his mind. A thought that had been buried beneath the chaos of the past few days. If Tony and Robert had known about the children all along, how much more did they know? And if they were willing to go to such lengths to control the inheritance, who else might come after what they believed was rightfully theirs? The shadows of the past were long, and Michael knew that even though Tony and Robert were behind bars, the danger might not be over. There was still darkness lurking on the horizon, and the game was far from finished. The final confrontation was yet to come. Chapter 8. The Final Twist. A week later, Michael sat in the back seat of a black sedan, watching the city blur past the window as the car sped toward its destination. The past few days had been a whirlwind of recovery, revelations, and preparations. After learning the truth about Jake and Lily, Michael had focused on one thing: ensuring their safety and giving them a future free from the shadows that had plagued his own life. June had arranged a meeting at a secluded location outside the city. It was a small, quiet house surrounded by tall trees, far from the chaos that had consumed their lives. It was a place where the children could be safe, where Michael could finally meet them as their father. As the car pulled up to the house, Michael felt a mix of emotions: anxiety, hope, fear. He had spent years haunted by his past, and now he was about to confront a future he had never expected. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and stepped out of the car. June was waiting for him on the porch, her expression calm, but her eyes betraying a hint of nervousness. She nodded to him as he approached. "They're inside," she said softly. "They've been told a little bit about you, but this will be new for them. Take it slow." Michael nodded, his throat tight. He wasn't sure what to say, how to act. All he knew was that he had to be there for them no matter what. He followed June into the house, his heart pounding in his chest. The children were in the living room playing quietly with some toys. When they saw Michael, they looked up, their eyes wide with curiosity. "Jake, Lily," June said gently. "This is Michael. He's here to talk to you." The children stared at him, and for a moment Michael was frozen. But then Lily, the younger of the two, stood up and walked over to him, her small hand clutching a stuffed animal. She looked up at him with big, inquisitive eyes. "Are you our dad?" she asked, her voice innocent and direct. Michael felt a lump form in his throat. He knelt down to her level, his eyes meeting hers. "Yes," he said, his voice soft but firm. "I'm your dad." Lily studied him for a moment, then smiled, a small, tentative smile that made Michael's heart ache with both joy and sorrow. She reached out and took his hand as if she had known him all along. Jake, older and more reserved, watched from a distance. Michael looked over at him, sensing the boy's hesitation. "It's okay, Jake," Michael said gently. "You don't have to be afraid. I'm here to keep you safe." Jake didn't respond right away, but after a moment, he slowly approached, his eyes searching Michael's face for something, reassurance perhaps, or a sign that this stranger really was who he claimed to be. Michael extended his hand, and after a brief hesitation, Jake took it. The connection, though small, felt monumental to Michael. For the first time, he felt like he was truly fulfilling his role as their father. For the next hour, they sat together, talking, playing, and getting to know each other. It was awkward at times, filled with moments of uncertainty, but there was also warmth, something Michael hadn't felt in years. He could see Sally in their faces, in their expressions, and it both comforted and saddened him. He had missed so much, but now, at least, he had a chance to make up for it. As the afternoon turned into evening, June came to Michael's side and gently touched his arm. "They need to rest now," she said, "but you can see them again tomorrow." Michael nodded, standing up and giving the children one last smile before following June to the door. As they stepped outside into the cool evening air, Michael felt a sense of peace wash over him, tempered by the weight of all that had happened. But as they walked toward the car, the peaceful moment shattered. A sudden sharp sound pierced the air. A gunshot. Michael froze, his heart leaping into his throat as he instinctively shielded June and looked around, searching for the source of the danger. Another shot rang out, and Michael saw a figure emerge from the tree line, a gun in hand. His blood ran cold as he recognized the man. It was someone he had never expected to see again, Tony Jordan. But Tony was supposed to be in jail. How had he escaped? And why was he here? Michael's mind raced as he realized the full extent of what was happening. Tony had somehow managed to break free, and now he was coming for revenge. Revenge against the man who had ruined his plans, who had taken everything from him. Tony's face was twisted with fury as he approached, his gun aimed directly at Michael. "You thought you could stop me?" he snarled, his voice dripping with hatred. "You thought you could take everything from me and just walk away?" Michael stood his ground, his mind racing for a way out. But before he could react, another shot rang out, this one from behind him. Tony's eyes widened in shock, and he staggered backward, clutching his chest as blood began to seep through his shirt. Michael turned and saw June holding a small pistol, her hands trembling. She had shot Tony, saving Michael's life in the process. But the danger wasn't over yet. Tony fell to the ground, gasping for breath, but even as he lay dying, he managed to speak. "It's not over," he wheezed, his eyes filled with malice. "There's someone else. They'll finish what I started." With that, Tony's body went limp, and the life drained from his eyes. He was dead, but his final words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Michael stared at Tony's lifeless body, his mind reeling. Someone else? Who could it be? What other threat was out there? June lowered the gun, her face pale. Michael. What did he mean? Who else is involved? Michael shook his head, his thoughts a chaotic whirl. "I don't know," he said, his voice hollow. "But if Tony was telling the truth, then this isn't over. There's still someone out there, someone who wants what he wanted." June's expression darkened. "What are we going to do?" Michael looked back at the house, where Jake and Lily were safely inside, unaware of the danger that had just unfolded. His heart ached with the knowledge that they were still at risk, that the shadows of the past hadn't fully been dispelled. "We protect them," Michael said finally, his voice firm. "Whatever it takes, we protect them." As they walked back toward the house, Michael knew that the battle was far from over. The enemy was still out there lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. But this time Michael was ready. He had fought too hard, sacrificed too much to let the past claim him or his children, and as he steeled himself for the final confrontation, he knew that no matter what came next, he wouldn't let them down. The shadows might be closing in, but Michael was determined to fight back to the very end.